Manhwa title in the right corner of the screen. Enjoy watching.
Suburban neighborhood, Halo territory, the land that the princess chose as her dowry when she got married. After the divorce, these lands became a conflict for 10 years, for she could not relinquish them. These lands are very valuable, fertile lands, which is why the emperor ordered the commander-in-chief at the time, the Knight of the Empire, to start a territorial conflict. A knight enjoying his honeymoon with his wife, as suddenly has to interrupt it. Orders are orders. There was nothing to be done. You can't argue with the emperor, so I had to quickly gather all my things and set off to do my duty. The guy was counting the days when it would end so he could return to his beloved, as he soon learns two pieces of news. One terrible and the second worse than the first. The death of his wife and the disappearance of their child. After that, it was impossible to think of anything else. He looked for every possible way, came back and asked someone to replace him on the battlefield. 10 years ago, Agnes Maynard, wife of Duke Maynard, while her husband was at work, managed to give birth to a child. But the severe illness that chained her after the disappearance of her child was invincible. The girl suffered for a long time and, in the end, could not withstand. The newborn child was doomed to be without a mother, and perhaps even a father for the rest of his life. No one knew if he would come back, or even if he was alive today. Agnes was said goodbye. She was a good girl, but unfortunately fate did not let her enjoy even 1 year of her child. She could not even hear his voice. Hearing this terrible news and that his wife was gone, and naturally, the decision was made instantly. Duke Maynard, constrained by the imperial decree, could not leave her, and for the first time could not see anyone. He hated everything and everyone. In an attempt to negotiate, he failed. No one would even go into his personal life. There were no understanding people around. All he could do was give orders to find the missing child. It was unbearable. His eyes were watering, and something was tearing him up inside at the thought that he would never see the child he and Agnes had waited so long for. So 10 years flew by, and just now the lad returned home, where he was welcomed by all the servants. The chief maid of the mansion, Mary, said some pleasant words to him, and at the same time expressed her condolences, for there had been no opportunity to say so before. Duke Maynard had returned to his estate, and it was a great joy to all those who had been worried about him and waiting for him back. Many people wanted to support him, to ask him some questions, but they saw how hard it was for him because his wife and child could be waiting for him here. If he had only known this would happen, there was no way he would have agreed and stayed with his family. Perhaps he could have helped his beloved and all would have been well. But unfortunately, he made a mistake and regrets it very much. He'd lost the most precious thing in the house, and it was probably best not to even talk to him about it right now. The guy asked not to be disturbed. From now on, his goal is to find the kid. He even warned to forget about him for a while, and until he finds him, nothing, and no one else interests him. I want to believe he can do it because it's been 10 years and anything could have happened in that time. He doesn't even know if this child lives or not, what city he's in, or what the likelihood is that he already has a new family that might have taken him in during those hard times. Meanwhile, the Duke opens his wife's portrait, which has been closed all this time, at which point he nearly falls through the ground. It was harder than he could have imagined. Words couldn't describe how hard it was to look at the man he would only be able to answer now like this. That day he promised himself not to give up, because if it happens and he gives up, one day he will regret it very much. And so among the many candidates there was a girl, which with great probability is his daughter. Her name is Liliana. Unfortunately, in the Empire, there is no special technology to be able to find out the truth forever. Whether she is his child or not, we can only guess. The aides keep saying it takes even more time. There are a lot of similarities in this world, both in adults and children, including. Butler Stefan realizes how tired the Lord is of doing this, but that doesn't mean they should stop, because it's possible that Liliana might not be the one they were looking for. She's a good kid, but still, it's still early in the bedtime business. Turns out the guy didn't just pick her for no reason. He was paying attention not only to his personal premonitions, but also to the one item that could only be his own child. This pendant disappeared with the child, but there's a catch. The child bears little resemblance to him or his late wife. She's small, thin. It's obvious she's suffered a lot. And the big brown eyes that take up most of her face, the kind of children he's met countless times before, and for some reason he feels that even though everything else doesn't matter much, the color of the eyes makes him wonder. For some inexplicable reason, he feels that his daughter should have exceptionally blue eyes, though he himself doesn't know why he's so sure of it. Who knows? Maybe the girl found someone's lost pendant a long time ago. That could very well happen too. Stefan doesn't even know what to say. He thinks you can go around the world, but without 100% proof, it would be erroneous to claim who is whose child. As far as he knows, there are very few such methods, and he doesn't quite remember what they are. What about Liliana and her eye color? It turns out that the Duke had the same brown eyes with a green tint when he was a child. So the blue eyes he expected to see in her are still up for debate. This is very interesting information. The butler told some more stories from that time, so they got a little distracted and even wept. Meanwhile, the guy asked where she was born, because it is also important, if such information is available, it will be good. In the child's belongings, deputies found this certificate of guardianship issued to minor children. So she was from the orphanage, but from what the man had heard, normally such documents should be kept with the director. But in some cases, it is given to the child when he wants to be established. He asks for it himself, and in that case, he can actually have the document. The testimony confirms the fact of proving those circumstances of the disappearance, which means that it is necessary to find out more and already be definitively sure whether Lillian is his daughter or not. The assistant suggests waiting until the girl wakes up. She is very exhausted after the road, and then see if she remembers anything. All was calm, when suddenly Lillian had no sooner reached the bed than she fainted, and unfortunately, hit her head very hard. The maid was so much frightened that she considered it her mistake. She promised that she would watch her more closely and would not leave until the girl was asleep. Everyone realizes that she hasn't had the best conditions in the past. She could be exhausted, both mentally and physically, not to mention the way she's been fed. The Duke has immediately called a doctor and is already thinking about her menu for today. He heard somewhere that children should eat right, instructed everyone he could to see to it, and it is very right. Stefan enjoys watching the guy worry about the baby, even though he's not entirely sure whose it really is. Lillian, all weepy, is lying in bed. She has a high fever. Periodically, the maids come to her, but this time it was the Duke who did it. He's so worried that he can't even do business in his office, and he imagines how uncomfortable she is here, with all the strangers around, not knowing whether she's come to see her father or not. These couple hours have been the most excruciating for her. It's probably not to do with a cold. She's just reacted that way to the change of scenery, and it's important to make her feel comfortable here soon. Even if it turns out she's not his daughter, Lillian deserves to be treated well, especially after all she's been through in her childhood. The Duke supported her as best he could. He stayed by her side, endlessly checking her temperature and worrying, just so she wouldn't get worse. Every minute she becomes more and more dear to him. The guy does not rule out that no matter how things turn out, he can leave her here and will not allow himself to return her to the orphanage. He talked to his assistant about it, and of course she immediately supported this wonderful idea. It would be great for the girl to grow up where she was loved, and if the Duke found his daughter, she would have a half-sister with whom they would become friends. There are too many things to do, too many worries, but it's still with her and doesn't leave her side for a minute. Nothing is more important than her health right now. She's alone in this huge house, and if she wakes up, it's important to have someone around. That way she feels like I don't care about her either, and will quickly feel at home. At that moment, he remembered Agnes again, but still found the strength to realize that the past could not be brought back. He had to adapt to the new reality. Otherwise, the whole life would pass by and he would not have time to live it as he wanted. He would miss many happy moments, even though they would not be as bright and colorful as those he had experienced with her. Now he has a new life. He has a girl in front of him who needs his love and support very badly. Meanwhile, he wanted to be even closer to her. His hand, as if by itself, touched her forehead, and that was the only thing that happened. As she muttered softly, "Where are you? I miss you. I miss you so much, I love you, I want to come back." She uttered the same thing several times. At first, he didn't even pay attention to it, as he thought, who else could a little girl love at that age than her parents? He had an idea that if she remembered something, it might help a lot. Suddenly, she was left without them at a more or less conscious age and would tell him something interesting, though it was unlikely that she would immediately say that she already had a father and would definitely not want to stay here. As soon as he notices how hard her heart is pounding, there's a feeling that is very unfamiliar to him. The guy still isn't convinced that she is his missing child, and doesn't understand why he is so unwilling to see her suffer then. Maybe he just doesn't know and loves kids a lot, well, or she really is his own daughter, and his subconscious is just suggesting it. The only pity is that of all of them. Only the girl herself knows the truth. Some time ago, when she was still in the orphanage, a terrible grief happened. The Duke's own child was very weak from birth. The girl was often sick and bore it with unbearable agony. She spent all those 10 years in the orphanage, and just when her father was supposed to come back for her, the girl dies. The orphanage director, Winston Bernazer, couldn't even imagine having to explain to her father. Once someone found out that a child had died in his orphanage, it's scary to imagine what people, even those not affected, would do to that director. And that's not all. Yes, the man was very worried about it, but there was a but. He was only afraid for his reputation and the money he could get for that child. All of this is overheard by her best friend Lillian. She's been standing outside the door the whole time and can't believe that the lovely headmaster she thought was a good man was not at all what he seemed. One of the caregivers started suggesting different ways to keep this situation quiet and keep everyone happy. No one was going to reveal the truth, but the fact that the conversation of these people was overheard by Lillian, perhaps she would tell the Duke sooner or later and do a good deed. The only thing that can stop her is if she doesn't want to leave his house and wants to pretend like everything is fine. They also took the girl's pendant, which had a portrait of her parents in it. It was the thing they wanted to do something with to make it as believable as possible. It was only because of that pendant that they had found out then who the girl's parents were. The headmaster even had a plan. He had treated her well on purpose, did more for her than for the other children, and imagined how happy the Duke would be to know that they had been taking care of his daughter all this time, and of course counted on a considerable reward. And that was not all. Not only did he expect a reward from him, but also compensation that they had had the girl for too long. It turns out he didn't just want to see blue eyes in his child. He really felt like he did, but it was a pity that he was so easily and brazenly deceived. Not only will the guy never see his daughter, but he'll only find out about her death when he's told about it. The principal wanted his money so badly that he dared to come up with a plan involving someone else's child. He found a girl similar to the dead swan and thought that if they had this pendant, any girl could be the missing child the guy longed to find. He had no trouble finding another dark-haired girl, tried to negotiate with her, promised she wouldn't be sorry, and smiled as if he already had the money and there was no longer any problem in the death of a beautiful child. When Lillian had heard everything, she ran away, and she did it just in time. In just a minute, the teacher had the feeling that someone was listening. They looked out and she was gone. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if someone had caught her. Secret things were discussed that no one could know. Lillian was already outside in a few seconds. She was beginning to get so frustrated that she didn't even know how to avenge her friend. Before, she had never even thought that grown men could be so horrible. They act like villains and think only of money. She doesn't want to stay here, but she has no choice. There are few adoptions here, so we have to wait until she comes of age and hope that Swan's case was the first and last. When Lillian came running into the room, she remembered the last moment with her friend, when she saw her very weak and could not even imagine how it would turn out. It didn't end with the death. After that, much more terrible things started to happen. To think how you can cheat a man out of his child by giving him not his child, but all for money and profit. This is how she learns about the world at such a young age. It was only after overhearing one conversation that her consciousness was turned upside down. If people weren't so cruel, she'd only have to deal with one problem, but now there are two. Where's the guarantee that she won't end up like Swan and her father? Lillian decided to fulfill her wish. She would not let anyone take her place, much less take advantage of the situation. She decided while she was still in the orphanage that she had to be part of the plan to go to Swan's parents' house and seek justice there. The Duke must learn the truth, but if someone else is given to him, it will never happen. Lillian must do everything possible and impossible to make sure she is the one sent to him. Now I can see why she felt so bad in a place where her friend should have been, and alive and happy. The girl was very afraid of how she, having nothing to do with their family, being not even close to the beautiful Swan, would be able to get into that house at all and last even a few hours. To begin with, the decision was made to sneak into the principal's office and retrieve the pendant, but it was simply impossible to do so and remain undetected. The girl couldn't find a good time. She rested a bit, waited for breakfast, and joined the other children. Those noticed that she had disappeared somewhere and even wanted to look for her. I had to explain that it was hard to wake up and everyone calmed down. Usually all the food is eaten very quickly. You need to have time to take your portion. And since the girl was late, she could have remained hungry, but she has friends who took care of her and left something for her. It was very nice of them, she thanked them, said how nice they were, how suddenly some boy didn't like it all. It is as if he is jealous that she is very much loved and helped, while he sits on the sidelines and is not needed by anyone. Everyone is used to it, but sometimes when he is very bored, you still have to put up with his difficult character. He asked her to stop worrying so much about her, because he had something more interesting to worry about than this Lillian. He said the situation could have been forgotten long ago. Nothing had happened, life went on, and it was none of their business to dwell on it for so long and ruin everyone's mood. Some boy tried to calm him down. He explained that he was wrong, you can't talk like that, especially in the presence of her close friend, who has it the hardest. This is Theo. He's 14 years old. He's the oldest boy in this orphanage, and in fact, Lillian knows exactly what he means. He also lost his best friend Dillian, who died of a severe illness, which is what made Theo so angry. The girl could discuss this topic for a long time, to prove something to someone, as suddenly she heard that Rose was called to the principal's office, which meant that she had very little time. Theo saw firsthand how excited Rose was, and would do anything to move somewhere else. Lillian couldn't resist asking him to tell her everything he'd seen or heard. She doesn't even want to think about the fact that if the principal has already found a dark-haired girl, then it turns out Swan's replacement has been found and she's too late. The girl couldn't stay that long. She resents the fact that Swan died only 3 days ago, and they're acting like nothing happened. It's like she's the only one who remembers it, is sad and can't get over it. Swan used to be adored, friends with her, everything was fine, and in the end, some people forgot about her even after a day. She wanted to be somewhere quiet so no one would find her. She was about to run toward the tree when someone grabbed her arm and told her to stop. It turned out to be Theo. He felt bad when he realized he had said something unnecessary and came to apologize. The girl had never thought she was capable of it, for there in the dining room he was like a different person. The boy doesn't know how to explain all the things he wanted to. He just keeps holding on to her and wants to tell her that he's not as bad as he seems. The thing is, those conversations about Swan remind him of Dillian, which is why he's so insistent on not saying a word about it anywhere, or else he'll fall back into depression and start hating the whole world. Surprisingly, the girl didn't even bother to listen to him. The first thought she had was that he might be useful to her. She was very quick to tell me what she was going to do, which was to leave the shelter, and soon. And the reason? She's going to find her parents. None of that's true, but that's only because no one can know the real reason. Theo can't believe his ears. He doesn't understand what she's saying, much less how she's going to do it. Of course, he immediately began to dissuade her, reminding her of the risks, that if she ran away, she wouldn't be able to come back here. And in fact, she didn't even have money to buy food for the first time. None of this has worked. She continues to stand her ground. No one and nothing can change her mind to stay anymore. There's a horrible principal and tutors who use the kids for their own gain. These are the people who should be punished, and very soon it will happen. They will answer for every crime and every penny they've gotten for as long as they've been doing this. Eventually, he got tired of explaining things and just asked to do whatever he wanted, but warned that if he caught anyone, he wouldn't even help. Turns out she told him that for a reason, started to hint that he could use some time to think about it too while she was here, and they could do it together. She reminded him that he was about to turn 15, and if he wasn't placed with some family before then, after 15, Theo would be put on a farm. It's nothing but manipulation. He can hardly refuse the offer. After all, he does run the risk of going to the farm, and she gives him a chance to avoid it. Afterward, Lillian very boldly promised to help and not let his life be spoiled. That conversation at the orphanage was very serious. The girl knew even then that sitting still was the worst thing she could do, and before she got to the Duke's house, she had managed to do a huge amount of work. It all started the moment she asked him to help in return. Theo was interested, but first he wanted to know what she would do for him, and most importantly, what guarantees she had that everything would work out. It turned out that Lillian was smart enough to offer to get his custody certificate, and once Theo had it, the principal couldn't give it to him. And until she found the document, Theo wouldn't go anywhere, and he could stay here for 10 more years if he wanted to. All he has to do is make it possible for her to get into the principal's office, and then she'll do it herself, take the documents and the pendant. She explained the whole plan in great detail, even suggested a few options and warned him that it would only work out if he trusted her. It was obvious that Theo was interested. He was not against this adventure, only asked to tell him the plan in as much detail as possible, so that in case of anything he could orient himself in time and better understand what to do. From you, he's told you everything he's learned lately, and it turns out the best day for the plan is tomorrow. The director's out, which means we have to act. Lillian remembered that in 4 days, on Sunday, there would be a reception in honor of the Duke of Maynard's return, meaning there was little time at all. It turns out that all the most interesting things will happen tomorrow. It remains only to have a good rest and gain strength. In the meantime, the principal's already leaving on his own, and he's escorted by the very same educator and promises that everything will be all right. Theo and Lillian followed all of this. They are very serious, and even from the start of the day, both are in good spirits. At last, they talked over the whole plan again. Who should do what, and went their separate ways. She wished him luck. And Theo was only now realizing what he'd gotten himself into, and realizing that this was no longer a joke. That plan, which they have already discussed over 10 times just this morning alone, is to start a small fire. It will be the responsibility of the provider to point this out and address the problem, which means there will be time to break into the room and no one will be watching. Theo's job is to start a fire just like that and toss a burning object right into that little house. There's a lot of stuff in there that burns easily, and it would take at least half an hour to put out a fire. That's enough time to get into the office, get what you need, and get out. The boy didn't come close. He hid behind a tree so as not to draw attention to himself. He simply wrapped some cloth around the stone, set it on fire, and threw it through the window. This is in case no one noticed him and said they saw him at the time of the fire near the house. The stone easily broke through the window and a huge flame appeared in a matter of seconds. A column of smoke rose up around him, making it hard to miss. Although it is almost impossible to hear the fire itself, the teacher heard the broken glass immediately. He thought it was someone playing soccer, as usual. He doesn't even realize that it's more serious than that. Lillian at this point makes sure that the tutor leaves to check everything. And the second the man leaves, she's off to the office to do the rest of the work. Just in case, she'd warned Theo as early as yesterday. If the caretaker suddenly wanted to go back to call the fire department, he'd have to hold him off and hold out for at least a little while. All hope is that the man will decide to draw water himself and put out the fire without waiting for firefighters. She couldn't open the lock fast enough this time because she had been punished less. She had gotten so bad at picking locks. It was taking longer than she had planned. Now she would have to do it twice as fast. The girl decided to start with the nearest places. She doesn't quite know where what she needs is because the director often changes everything and arranges rearrangements. He felt like it and did it last night. There are so many shelves, so many documents that you might not have time. Lillian tries not to think about anything else. In any case, she has nothing to lose, she's already here, and until she finds something, she's not going anywhere. The first ones to be found were the custody certificates. Luckily, they are all collected in one book, otherwise we would have had to hurry even more. That's it. Now we need to find the pendant, which is probably not in the most visible place either. Obviously, no one keeps the most important things in prominent places. The girl was ready for it, but time was running out and she had only documents in her hands. There aren't any safes or caskets in here. She's already checked everything and doesn't realize where he left everything. Lillian even made it to her friend's room in time. Perhaps her things were returned here, but there's nothing here either, and you can't come back empty-handed. The girl quickly became frustrated as she suddenly remembered their last conversation when Swan had tried to teach her about restraint. She hadn't thought about it at the time, but she could use that ability now, and it could help her. It's a bit of a bad time, but she starts getting distracted by the memories and doesn't even notice it herself, which is too bad. The tutor could come back and check the office at any moment. She has chess in her mind, the beautiful weather, her conversation with her friend, her voice and the feeling that she's being tricked. Swan is around and none of it is true. A few minutes have passed. Time is ticking away, and she hasn't gotten back to business. Theo must be trying hard, distracting the teacher, but she stands still and does nothing. Lillian loved her friend so much that she can't take her mind off the memories of her, even at such a special moment. The girl remembered the words very clearly, how Swan had supported her, and after that it was as if she had a second breath, a belief in herself, and a goal to which she no longer saw any obstacles. She came back to reality, thought it over very well, didn't rush, didn't waste time on unnecessary movements, just thought about where it was most likely that what she had come for could be. I started to rely on my intuition, calmly approached the rack of books, reached out my hand, and then everything went somehow by itself. There are so many books here, all similar to each other. There are those that are slightly different and eye-catching, and those that are unremarkable. If you think logically, a person who wants to hide something in them is unlikely to choose the brightest and most attractive book. Most likely, he will choose the grayest, smallest, hard to see at first glance. Eventually, she got it right. She found a place with the most common books, pushed them aside, and saw a small locked cabinet where all the things she needed were. She went back to Theo, gave him the papers, and told him that if she had started going through every book, nothing would have worked. But she stopped in time and chose the right strategy. Even though the boy doesn't care about that, he's not interested in hearing about the secret places in the principal's office because it doesn't make sense anymore. He might actually be right, but it was important for her to say so. It was about her friend after all, so whatever she did made everything more special. In addition to Swan's personal belongings, she took some precious ones with her, which should be enough for food and maybe something else. She thought long and hard about whether she should do it, but there was no other option. She would have to eat something, and without money she wouldn't be able to survive for a couple of days. Since they were already safely in their room, the girl decided not to pass up the opportunity and hinted again to think about getting him out of here with her after all while she had the chance. Theo pretended not to pay attention to those words. He would still have to think about it, but for now, one could notice how well their common cause had brought them together. They talked for a while, and it was time to discuss what to do next. Time was running out after all, and they had only done half of what they had planned. It all depended on whether she left here on her own or with him. There was no way to avoid that question. He had to think about it, and in a few seconds it would all become clear. Theo asks to be given some more time. It is not as easy as it seems, because he has spent his whole life here and has no idea what awaits him outside the shelter. His apprehension is quite natural. Lillian tries not to rush him, but each time it becomes less easy. Personally, she had already decided everything long ago. No time to look back, doubt, and give in to emotions. If the boy didn't make up his mind, she'd have no problem leaving here alone. It's going to happen in just a few minutes, and unless Theo changes his mind, they'll have to say goodbye. In the end, he was afraid to take the risk, didn't go anywhere, just wished her luck, and was even surprised when the urge to ask her to stay even for a few minutes came up. Just a short time ago, they hated each other. They had nothing in common. And now they could barely say goodbye quietly and let each other go. Lillian would love to stay for half a day, but she needs to meet with the Duke much sooner than the headmaster will, so the choice is obvious. She had to leave, close the door behind her, and walk towards a new life in which so many new things, both good and bad, awaited her. The important thing is that they will remember each other with good words, and no one will hold grudges or grudges. As she hadn't had time to exchange the diamond for money yet, she had to hide in a wagon going to the capital. It was the only way to get there, and of course she was not going to go there on foot. The wheels rolled on the dusty road. All of it she had been breathing for hours, but it couldn't have been any other way. She was grateful to have gotten there, at least this way. It was time to rest, to sleep as usual, to dream about a friend who smiles and rejoices as if none of this had happened. But if she only knew how hard it is in this world without her. So much so that it is impossible to describe in any words. It was a shame that because of the lack of care and help from the headmaster, she had no chance to recover. She had suffered for days, and in that time no one had even deigned to come to her room. Lillian was the only one with her, and she was the only one who had seen the agony, but now would not forgive it to anyone, ever. If someone dares to take someone's life so lightly, fails to fulfill their responsibilities, and only thinks about money, then that someone should be punished. The girl will do everything in her power. She will have to grow up much earlier than other children. In any case, it is more correct than to do nothing at all and forget about what happened. She will fight to the last for justice and will not rest until those people get what they deserve. Meanwhile, they are already very close to the palace, and as soon as the wagon stops, the girl already knows what will have to be done next. She has everything she needs with her. Her speech prepared in advance. Everything should go well without any unpleasant surprises. The main thing is to get to the Duke and make sure he doesn't kick her out anytime soon, and then everything will work itself out. She'll act as she goes. Lillian tries to remain inconspicuous. She quickly jumped out and is already preparing to talk to the guards. The main thing is to make sure no one guesses she's from the orphanage before she says it herself. You just need to behave naturally and remember that she has already done the main thing. She has left the shelter, and this is already a lot. If she was able to do the basics, she can definitely handle it. The main thing is to be confident and don't forget what she's doing it for. The girl believes Swan sees her from heaven. She even talks to her and begins to look at this house through her eyes. She was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately fate has decreed otherwise. Meanwhile, as soon as she approached the gate, as expected, she was immediately stopped by the guards. One of them said she didn't belong here and asked her to leave immediately, but she wouldn't be stopped by that. Lillian explained that she had come to see the Duke. She had an important conversation to have, and to avoid any more questions, she had to show him something. Everyone knows about this pendant, and if a guard sees it, you can assume the girl is already in the Duke's office. She demonstrated the pendant, everyone understood, and immediately afterward the girl asked to either call their master to her or escort her to his office. As a result, in just a few minutes she was already in the house. The maids cannot be happy that they finally saw her and now will be able to take care of this young lady. They've even managed to put a nice dress on her, though no one knows anything yet. She's only just gotten here and hasn't even seen the Duke. She got sadness again. This place could have been Swan. She would have been loved here, but as it was. While the Duke is busy, the girl is introduced to the maids, who are barely trying to contain their emotions. They were waiting for her just as much as the Lord, judging by the reaction, as if even more so. In the meantime, it turned out that the Duke had to go somewhere. He had no time to even look at the girl, so she had to stay here until morning. She was assigned a room, made a bed, and treated like a new young mistress. They are so happy to look after her that it seems that if all goes well and she stays here, they will have the most wonderful relationship, and Lillian will enjoy her life every day. She had already been helped to bathe, washed her hair, cleaned up, found new clothes, and told to get ready for breakfast, which will actually be served right in bed. She won't even have to go anywhere. And then all that's left to do is pick out the dress she'll spend the rest of the day in. Everyone interacts with her like a real noble lady. Everything would be fine, but feeling as if there should have been a friend in that spot makes her a little uneasy. This is the truest dream life she couldn't even dream of. The girl would be grateful even if she didn't get kicked out of here. And in the end, everything is just fine. And sometimes even too much. The maids don't leave her side for a second, constantly hugging her as if she were their own child. They never cease to admire her. One can only hope that everything goes as perfectly with the Duke as it did with them. Though she had come here to deceive him, but only at first, the girl would be very happy if he treated her well and believed everything she was already willing to tell him. At some point, because things are so good, there is a fear that things could suddenly get really bad. Lillian is a little nervous, and the others take it as if she's just anxious before meeting her father. Strangely, no one had a single question about how she got here or where she had been all this time. Her father would probably ask about that, but for now she had time to relax and get used to the surroundings. The time flew by with the maids. They had a good conversation. The girl had a delicious meal and was very grateful to them for it. At some point, a third maid joined them, and she, like the others, was also madly excited to meet them. They started saying so many compliments that Lillian was even surprised. She had never seen herself treated so well, and thought that it was probably the norm everywhere but that orphanage. She was starting to get used to the nice surroundings, and thought how unfortunate it was that Theo had given it all up. She could have easily called him her best friend and asked him to live here with them. Once the maids told her that her short hair really suited her, she would have to stop letting it go. Now she would cut it more often and keep it short. Since she's replacing her friend and pretending to be her, she should try to be as pretty as possible. If people say short hair suits her, she'll have to keep it that way forever. It's a good thing no one knows that Swan has long hair that's very different from Lillian's. Otherwise, there would be no point in her even running away from the orphanage. The girl has no idea when to expect the Duke, but still does not relax and constantly repeats the words she will say to him when she meets him. Also, despite all the fact that she is very loved here, treated perfectly, she doesn't plan to start trusting anyone, because she doesn't know these people at all. Little if any reason why they are so, even overly polite. You can't rely on anyone here. They're strangers. Not the most pleasant experience at the orphanage had taught her that. It's not bad so far, but the girl isn't as naive as her age might suggest, and that's a very good thing. Nevertheless, the head maid of this house, Mary, is already with her. She decided to give a little tour, to tell her what is where, to show all the most beautiful places, of which there are enough. The girl smiles back. She's very grateful that they're spending their time on her, even though they have no idea that things are a little different than they think. Anyway, such are the circumstances. The only thing that never fails to confuse her is that they are so happy to have her there. It's all kind of suspicious. It's weird that people are excited about someone else's child. It was acceptable while dating, but it's been over a day and they won't stop treating her like a 5-year-old. And the best part, the girl noticed that as soon as she looks in their direction or starts to say something, their faces become tense, as if all that emotion wasn't real. And it is also unclear why the Duke having learned that the girl is already here, did not even deign to look at her. After all, so much waited and dreamed to see her. These people are some kind of overly mysterious. She's not quite sure what's going on, but she's sure there must be some explanation. In the meantime, he's already back, and it's the very moment she has a high fever. Lillian opens her eyes and sees a man in front of her that she doesn't want to fool at all. He won't stop touching her face, monitoring her temperature and trying not to ask any questions. She needs to come to her senses. Some time had passed. The girl hadn't expected to see him this night. She felt a little better, and she had finally waited for this moment. She blushed a little, but still managed to greet him and apologized for him seeing her in such a state. The man replied that it wasn't her fault, it was okay. The important thing was that she was fine and felt good. He himself is sorry to see them after all this time. He can't even realize what's going on. Theoretically, his own daughter could be in front of him right now. Though he tends to believe he is, the truth Lillian will tell him in at least a few days, maybe weeks, depending on how events unfold and how ready he is for it. In the meantime, they began to get to know each other. The girl told how well she was treated and thanked them for their warm welcome. She even wanted to get up to hug him, but he asked to stay on the bed and said he wanted to call some people. The Duke seemed somehow cold to her. It's like he's not happy to see her, even though she's not his own daughter. He doesn't know it and still too aloof. Then he just left, and the girl hadn't seen him since. That was yesterday morning, which meant that all this time he'd just been doing more important things. Lillian back with the head maid. She can't stop thinking that things are a little worse than she expected. It's like the Duke isn't interested in her. She even thought she might have accidentally said something in her sleep, and he might have heard it. In the end, just decided not to think bad thoughts. She's still here, and that's what matters. There's a little time ahead. Maybe he was just in a bad mood and something happened at work. After that, she very quickly remembered that few people like cranky people and in time became nice again. At one point, they were passing with Mary near a large window, and the girl noticed something that immediately caused her to ask her to stop. She was very interested in one place that immediately caught her attention from the first second she saw it. The woman is not surprised, for she herself often looks at this beautiful cottage and admires it in fine weather. It does look very cozy, beautiful, and catches everyone's attention, especially those who are seeing it for the first time. Mary certainly didn't mind stopping here and looking at the house, but when the girl asked who lived there and what kind of house it was, she remained silent, and only then explained that she didn't need to know about it. She only called out some name, an outhouse, and offered to pass on. The other maids promised that perhaps they would take her there someday, but definitely not anytime soon, instead suggesting that she do something else, like go out into the garden, which is beautiful even in winter, and no worse than that cute little house. Lillian doesn't mind, but if it's such a secret, she can't wait to be there already. She agreed to take a walk outside and decided that she would find out exactly what was so unusual that not even the Duke's daughter could know about it. They're clearly hiding something, and she can feel it. The house is pulling her like a magnet, and there's nothing she can do about it. Meanwhile, Duke is already at practice. He does it every day, tries to get there early, and now is the time. He tries not to lose his skills. Who knows when he might need them in the future? And this way, he doesn't have to prepare for a long time. Just a little training every day is enough. At one point, the gentleman for some reason asked if there were any children in the area. Isaac didn't quite understand what the question was about, lost his guard, and immediately lost. He doesn't understand why the Duke is interested in this, as it has nothing to do with the training, which is almost over. I really wonder why he's asking this. There could be many reasons, and there's probably no point in even guessing. This is Isaac of the Order of Maynard, and he has a wife and child, which is probably why the gentleman asked him this question. With this, he only reminded of the girl who had been living in the house for days. Isaac was already anxious to see her face, when suddenly, the Duke forbade him from even approaching her like everyone else. He asked not to be offended, and said he would explain everything a little later. As for Lillian, she wasn't the only one who had noticed his strange behavior, but already the knights and beyond, which meant she hadn't imagined it. The whole thing is that he doesn't want to rush into it, and he's really stressed about the fact that he himself doesn't know if she's his daughter yet, and there are already plenty of rumors about it. When Isaac reminds her that she did bring the pendant after all, and that should be proof, it's not enough. He wants to believe it too, but seems to want to check something out. He cannot get rid of doubts that everything is not as easy as it seems. If you look at the situation from the outside, just came to his house, somehow found this address, and it is strange why she did not do it before, so someone did not let her do it. It turns out that it is as if the man feels that something is wrong. He tries to believe what is happening, but inside, he does not leave the very anxiety that suggests the truth. No matter how much he said that he didn't fully accept Lillian, the Duke was right. She wasn't his own daughter after all, and it would be strange to take offense to that. She didn't come here to pretend to be his daughter. Yes, it will be like that at first, but the main thing she wants to do is to tell the whole truth and punish the director of the orphanage and all those who supported him and covered up his atrocities. Mr. does not forget that if his real daughter appears, and he has already gotten used to Lillian, it will be a strange situation. He does not plan to throw the girl out, but he is not going to stop searching for her. He doesn't want to hurt both children, and is actually thinking very right. If Swan were alive and another girl came into this house instead of her, it would be a shame if the Duke took the first one and never found his own daughter. He does what his heart tells him to do, and he's not wrong. The main thing, do not stop. And to the truth to get to him will help a man on whom he does not even count. Only Isaac is sure that everything will be fine, will be solved by itself, and is trying to convince the Lord. At last the boy asked what the Duke was going to do next, to which he replied that he simply did not know how to deal with her. There had never been children in his entourage, especially because of the fact that she might turn out to be his own daughter. It was not getting any easier. He had already managed to distance himself from her and showed himself not on the best side. And at that moment, his assistant decided to say the very right words. If the Lord hesitates, one day there might come a moment when it will be too late. The child will start to be alienated just the same. And even if Lillian is not his own daughter, she still deserves to be treated well no matter what. She's a defenseless little child, and he's a grown man who has a responsibility to make her life a little brighter, or at least try. It was so timely and unexpected that the guy even thanked him, moreover added a few days off and promised a bonus. Suddenly some sound came from the bushes. They didn't notice it right away, but they suspected something anyway. If it wasn't a private conversation that didn't concern anyone else, the Duke wouldn't have cared. But he still looked around and asked his assistant to do the same. Little did they know, maybe there was some maid nearby who decided to clean up the garden, and it turned out to be Lily. She had been eavesdropping the whole time and accidentally hit a branch that stirred and caught their attention. The girl was afraid that she would be noticed, and if she was, her trust would be lost instantly. Miraculously, she managed to escape from the place and thought that she should not do it again. I'll have to be more careful and get back here soon so there won't be any questions later. If anyone knew she was in the house and didn't go outside, it would be great. Lillian had already run to Mary and asked how she was doing. She pretended to have lost her bracelet and was looking for it on the street, and because of that, she was very hungry. The only thing she hadn't thought through was that she might have asked one of them to do it, but then she quickly oriented herself and explained that she just didn't want to stress anyone out. They had enough work of their own to do, especially since she herself wasn't busy and it wasn't hard to do it herself. In an attempt to continue to seem like a nice girl, the Duke's words hurt her a little. He said that he would check her, clarify the information, and until nothing was clear, he would not call her daughter. Lillian understood perfectly well that they were strangers, but for some reason it was very hurtful. She even felt like Swan, apparently very much in character, that she had begun to take everything she heard so personally. She just imagined if it had really been his own daughter in her place, how she would have reacted, for she would have been 1,000 times poorer than she was. In any case, there was no point in getting upset. She had a specific goal in mind, and right now it was undesirable to cry and draw unnecessary attention to herself. The girl was outside again. She hadn't warned her, and the maid was already looking for her. Lillian ran up to her, apologized, and promised that it wouldn't happen again. She explained that she was just interested in seeing everything around her, admiring the evening sunset and getting some fresh air. She was in the house all the time, and luckily it was all right. Nobody said anything. On the contrary, the maid was glad that everything was all right, for she had already thought all sorts of things. It was evening. Everyone had already gone inside, the day had flown by, and despite everything, it hadn't been as bad as it could have been. 2 days later, for all the time the girl has lived here, the maids can't stop saying how nice the job has become lately. The thing is, some people are really very fond of children, but regarding the rest, Lillian is very wary of them. Naturally, since they don't want to discuss anything else, all they do is talk about the latest developments. They notice that unlike the first day, the gentleman has changed a lot lately. Despite the huge amount of work, and the fact that the information was not confirmed, he finds time and energy to come to the girl every night and spend time with her. Apparently, he just listened to the aide, realized that it would be very right of him, and overall, it certainly wouldn't get any worse. In the meantime, they remember that the ball will be held today, which means that there is no time to rest. They need to urgently check if everything is ready, although they should have done it a few hours ago. All in all, things are going pretty well at the mansion. If it wasn't for the knight's advice, things might have been different, but luckily, everything is calm for now. Lillian is already beginning to be perceived as her own. They choose a university, a fiancé. It looks strange, but the girl has accepted it and does not react to it in any way. If they like to plan her life, she won't stop them from doing so. She's a long way from university and everyone will know the truth much sooner. Mary remembered that they had forgotten to feed the baby at night, and she hadn't had dinner yet. She asked everyone to be more careful and not to forget that Lillian lives here now. The woman thought about who could be sent to the child, who would take care of her dinner, and suddenly there was a small conflict within the team. They got confused about whose turn it was today and started talking over each other, thus only wasting time. It seemed as if they cared who took care of dinner, though it wasn't as hard as cleaning a room. It wouldn't take more than 15 minutes. And at this point, the woman becomes nervous. She realizes that the child has not eaten for a very long time and could have fainted, especially after a long walk outside. She didn't bother to find out, ran straight to her room, almost tripped a few times, but when she opened the door, she found no one there. She panics, starts running down the hallway, doesn't understand anything, has already made up her mind about a lot of things, and has no idea how it's all going to end. She knows only one thing. The Duke must not find out about this. They must find the girl, for maybe she got sick, went to call for help and fainted. Milady has disappeared. Everyone rushes to find her and has no idea what really happened to her, especially since she set it all up on purpose. All this time, Lillian has been in the carriage. She hid here when she supposedly went to take a bath, checked to make sure no one was watching her, and has been sitting here for hours. She wondered how quickly they would notice her disappearance, and really what she was doing it for and how it would end. And then the most interesting thing begins. The girl learns that the carriage is going somewhere. She quickly realizes the decision to stay and jump out rather somewhere along the way. She didn't expect this of herself. She was just afraid of something. Lillian thought that the Duke might throw her out at any moment, and to avoid being returned to the orphanage, she had to take the risk and make this difficult decision on the spot when the carriage was already on its way. It was unclear whether she would regret it or not. It was enough for her just the lack of care from the Duke. She doesn't want to cause him problems, although everything could be solved very easily. It was enough just to tell the truth and say goodbye, agreeing that she would not be given back. The decision was made so quickly that she didn't even have time to realize it. The young lady couldn't stand it and is not thinking about whether she will regret it or not. Everything had been so wonderful, easy, no one kicking her out. She could talk to the Duke at any time, but she'd given up, and too bad. Some time passed, she came to her senses, and immediately went back. It was lucky that the carriage did not go far. It was not the fastest, and just half an hour later, Lillian was already at the Duke's office. He opens the door and can't believe his eyes. Just now, the whole mansion was in a panic, and she appears so easily, like she was playing childish hide-and-seek with them all. Lucky the Duke didn't start yelling. He held back and just calmly asked what was wrong and why she had come to him in the first place. I had to make up a legend that she had been in the garden all this time, wanted to make a gift for him, found the right branches and wants him to keep it in his room as a decoration. The mere thought that the child is awake at such a late hour and has not had dinner makes him feel very ashamed. It was very nice to receive a present, but still, he did not supervise the child and starts to blame himself very much. The man promised himself that from this day forward, he would control her every move, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He's ashamed that the girl is no longer small, relatively easy to review, and he can't even go with that. Meanwhile, that very ball had already started. Everything was supposed to be fine, and he wasn't in the mood to even talk to people. His personal life is full of problems. He has no time for work, and he has no energy to have fun for a long time. If there was an opportunity to stay away, he would gladly do so. He is literally torn by the thought that, first, if Lillian turns out to be his own daughter, it turns out he may have hurt her very badly by alienating her from the beginning. And second, if his own daughter is not her, then by failing to deal with Lillian, he will similarly fail to deal with his own child. Duke has spent his whole life envisioning himself as a wonderful father, thinking this would be the most wonderful period of his life. But in the end, it's exactly the opposite. Here, the crown prince of the empire, Lennox Ebenezer, approaches him. They hadn't spoken in a long time, and naturally, as soon as he saw him, he decided to approach him. They used to talk all day long. They were almost best friends, but in the time they hadn't seen each other, everyone's lives had changed a lot. The guy is aware of all these problems of the Duke, at first thought not to remind about it, but then put himself in his place and decided to support. At first, the guy pretended that everything was fine, but then he admitted that it was the hardest and most problematic period in his entire life. It's not even as hard for him in combat as it is now, being at home with all these moments, though he used to think nothing was harder than work. He told him everything. They even managed to remember their youth, how they dreamed of becoming what they were now. And thanks to that, the guy, even for a couple of minutes, forgot about what had been bothering him for so long. And this, he does not remember his wife, concentrating only on the child, so he would have gone mad long ago and would not have been able to stand it. Lennox tries to be very gentle, not pushy, so as not to ruin his mood unnecessarily. It made him a little sad that this was no longer the Duke he knew, but he didn't blame him for that. After all, it could happen to anyone. The guy is still doing pretty well. He even finds the strength to attend events, and not everyone could do that. At that moment, a friend notices one piece of jewelry on his jacket, which the Duke for some reason left not in the room, but pinned on his clothes. Lennox had just brought it up and the guy was already smiling, as if Lillian was starting to remind him of something good. He was not angry, but on the contrary, as if he was happy to talk about her. It was very unexpected, because the mere mention of her, and he immediately changed in his face. It would seem that if a friend had reminded me, it should have been the other way around. And in the end, it only got better. Meanwhile, the girl looks at the Night Imperial Palace, cannot take her eyes off. It is so beautiful, you want to admire until the morning. She has no words to describe this beauty. Everything is so radiant and the music, which fits the event perfectly, gives an incredible atmosphere. It was exactly as she and her friend had imagined when they had dreamed of being in the Imperial Palace and couldn't imagine how things would turn out. And now she's here looking at this palace and she can't figure out what her feeling is at this moment. It's all very funny, it's kind of okay, but at the same time, not so okay. The girl even wept. She really wanted to be here with her, but it would never happen. There was no point in thinking or dreaming about it. And now is the moment when everything can be decided once and for all. Tonight's ball is dedicated to the Duke, which means that he will enter at the very end, and also guests like the headmaster should already be inside. We need to lure him out. But how? We'll have to think. The girl approached the guard, explained that she had gone outside for a while, lost her father, and thought he might be inside. The man explains that there is no way to enter without a special invitation in the form of a letter. He can only check on her father in the audience, so he asks her what his name is and what he looks like. She specifically called out the name of that principal, who on the one hand needed to be seen, but on the other hand was insanely scary. The guard asked her to wait here. He would be sure to find the right person and bring him to her. Lillian is confident. As soon as the principal hears that name, he will immediately realize it's her and go out to look for her right away. And once he's outside, she'll sneak right in to prove that Duke Maynard recognized her after all. It was impossible to pass through the main entrance without an invitation, as she had already found out. But the girl had noticed that the balcony connected to the garden, so there was some option. Lucky to find a suitably empty balcony and bushes nearby to lean on and sneak anywhere without any trouble. Lillian didn't even have time to grab onto anything. She's already being stopped by some man. You'd think it was some second guard. But unfortunately, it wasn't him. This man grabs her, starts to resent her, says everything he thinks about her, and then the girl hears a familiar voice. This is the same caretaker who was in league with the shelter director, and it's likely the man sent him in his place. It's unclear how he ended up here. Only the headmaster was supposed to be here, but they seem to have solved the problem somehow and managed to outwit the guard, though such a thing wouldn't be surprising on their part. Turns out the assistant principal had been waiting for her here all along. He knew she couldn't get through the main entrance and was sure she'd try to sneak in from the other side, and that's what happened. He grabbed her so hard that it was no longer bearable, having to defend herself as best she could. Lillian realizes that the situation is out of control, but at the same time, she doesn't even plan to give up. She's gone through so much to get here, traveled the hardest road, and you can't beat her that easily. Very timely, the assistant comes back. He saw that the girl was missing and decided to find her, She got madly excited and started to tell. As this stranger tries to take her somewhere, she sees him for the first time and has no idea what he's doing here. The assistant principal starts to say that everything is fine. The girl just resented him and doesn't want to stay with her uncle. She screamed that it wasn't true and started begging for help. And the moment she said she had a father here, it was overheard by the Duke and his friend nearby. Lillian didn't notice how she said it, and in fact, it was very right. The guy heard her voice, even though he was sure that the girl shouldn't be here. He didn't ignore it, as if he felt that she needed him now. The girl had already begun to cry from hopelessness as the Duke descended into the courtyard in a second and rushed to protect the child. He heard that scream, ran up, started hugging her and comforting her like his own daughter. And now that villain can only wish her luck. The first time he asked what happened, everyone started to be silent, stepping back. But the second time his question sounded very different. The man apologized first and started telling me that this child was from their shelter, from which he had run away some time ago. The guy didn't want to hear anything but the answer to his question. He saw the girl being kidnapped and made it clear that no one was going to get away with it. For the rough treatment of the child, this villain will at least be punished, and what will happen to him next, the Duke will think of later. He explained that this child is under his care, and no one will ever return it to any orphanage. This is exactly what the girl did not even dream of hearing from him. From that moment, she calmed down, trusted him, and realized that he would not give her to anyone.